Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 137. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle said, the prayer of a person who does hadith, passes, urine, stool or wind, is not accepted till he performs, repeats, the ablution. A person from Hadramaut asked Abu Huraira, what is hadith? Abu Huraira replied, hadith means the passing of wind from the anus. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 138. Narrated by Nu'aym al-Mujamir, once I went up the roof of the mosque, along with Abu Huraira. He performed ablution and said, I heard the Prophet saying, on the day of resurrection, my followers will be called al-Ghurul Muhajjalun from the trace of ablution, and whoever can increase the area of his radiance should do so, i.e. by performing ablution regularly. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 139. Narrated by Abbas bin Tamim, my uncle asked Allah's Apostle about a person who imagined to have passed wind during the prayer. Allah's Apostle replied, he should not leave his prayers unless he hears sound or smells something. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 140. Narrated by Quraib, Ibn Abbas said, the Prophet slept till he snored and then prayed, or probably lay till his breath sounds were heard and then got up and prayed. Ibn Abbas added, I stayed overnight in the house of my aunt, Ma'imuna. The Prophet slept for a part of the night. See Fatha al-Bari page 249, Volume 1. And late in the night, he got up and performed ablution from a hanging water skin, a light, perfect, ablution, and stood up for the prayer. I, too, performed a similar ablution, then I went and stood on his left. He drew me to his right and prayed as much as Allah wished, and again lay and slept till his breath sounds were heard. Later on the muaddin, call maker for the prayer, came to him and informed him that it was time for prayer. The Prophet went with him for the prayer without performing a new ablution. Sufyan said to Amr that some people said, the eyes of Allah's Apostle sleep but his heart does not sleep. Amr replied, I heard Ubayd bin Umar saying that the dreams of prophets were divine inspiration, and then he recited the verse, I, Abraham, see in a dream, O my son, that I offer you in sacrifice, to Allah. 37.102, see Hadith number 183. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 141. Narrated by Usama bin Zayd, Allah's Apostle proceeded from Arafat till when he reached the mountain pass, he dismounted, urinated, and then performed ablution but not a perfect one. I said to him, is it the time for the prayer, O Allah's Apostle? He said, the place of prayer is ahead of you. He rode till when he reached Al-Muzdalifah, he dismounted and performed ablution and a perfect one. The call for Iqamah was pronounced and he led the Maghrib prayer. Then everybody made his camel kneel down at its place. Then the Iqamah was pronounced for the Isha prayer which the Prophet led, and no prayer was offered in between the two prayers, Isha and Maghrib. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 142. Narrated by Atta bin Yasar, Ibn Abbas performed ablution and washed his face, in the following way: he ladled out a handful of water, rinsed his mouth and washed his nose with it by putting in water and then blowing it out. He then took another handful of water, and did like this, gesturing, joining both hands, and washed his face, took another handful of water and washed his right forearm. He again took another handful of water and washed his left forearm, and passed wet hands over his head and took another handful of water and poured it over his right foot, up to his ankles, and washed it thoroughly, and similarly took another handful of water and washed thoroughly his left foot, up to the ankles, and said, I saw Allah's apostle performing ablution in this way. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 143. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet said, if any one of you on having sexual relations with his wife said, and he must say it before starting, in the name of Allah. O Allah, protect us from Satan and also protect what you bestow upon us, i.e. the coming offspring, from Satan, and if it is destined that they should have a child then, Satan will never be able to harm that offspring. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 144. Narrated by Anas, whenever the Prophet went to answer the call of nature, he used to say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika minal khabathi wal khaba'ith, i.e. O Allah, I seek refuge with you from all offensive and wicked things, evil deeds and evil spirits. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 145. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, once the Prophet entered a lavatory and I placed water for his ablution. He asked, who placed it? He was informed accordingly and so he said, O Allah, make him, Ibn Abbas, a learned scholar in religion, Islam. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 146. Narrated by Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, Allah's Apostle said, if any one of you goes to an open space for answering the call of nature he should neither face nor turn his back towards the Qibla, he should either face the east or the west. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 147. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, people say, whenever you sit for answering the call of nature, you should not face the Qibla or Baytul Maqdis, Jerusalem. I told them. Once I went up the roof of our house and I saw Allah's Apostle answering the call of nature while sitting on two bricks facing Baytul Maqdis, Jerusalem, but there was a screen covering him. Fathul Bari, page 258, Volume 1. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 148. Narrated by Aisha, the wives of the Prophet used to go to Al-Mansi, a vast open place, near Baqiya at Medina, to answer the call of nature at night. Umar used to say to the Prophet, let your wives be veiled, but Allah's Apostle did not do so. One night Sauda bint Zameh, the wife of the Prophet, went out at Isha time and she was a tall lady. Umar addressed her and said, I have recognized you, O Sauda. He said so, as he desired eagerly that the verses of Al-Hijab, the observing of veils by the Muslim women, may be revealed. So Allah revealed the verses of Al-Hijab, a complete body cover excluding the eyes. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 149. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet said to his wives, you are allowed to go out to answer the call of nature. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 150. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, I went up to the roof of Hafsa's house for some job and I saw Allah's Apostle answering the call of nature facing Sham, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon regarded as one country, with his back towards the Qibla. See Hadith number 147. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 151. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, once I went up the roof of our house and saw Allah's Apostle answering the call of nature while sitting over two bricks facing Baytul Maqdis, Jerusalem. See Hadith number 147. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 152. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, whenever Allah's Apostle went to answer the call of nature, I along with another boy used to accompany him with a tumbler full of water. Hisham commented, so that he might wash his private parts with it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 153. Narrated by Anas, whenever Allah's apostle went to answer the call of nature, I along with another boy from us used to go behind him with a tumbler full of water. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 154. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, whenever Allah's apostle went to answer the call of nature, I along with another boy used to carry a tumbler full of water, for cleaning the private parts, and an ansa, spear-headed stuck. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 155. Narrated by Abu Qatada, Allah's apostle said, whenever any one of you drinks water, he should not breathe in the drinking utensil, and whenever any one of you goes to a lavatory, he should neither touch his penis nor clean his private parts with his right hand. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 156. Narrated by Abu Qatada, the Prophet said, whenever any one of you makes water he should not hold his penis or clean his private parts with his right hand. And while drinking, one should not breathe in the drinking utensil. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 157. Narrated by Abu Huraira, I followed the Prophet while he was going out to answer the call of nature. He used not to look this way or that. So, when I approached near him he said to me, fetch for me some stones for cleaning the private parts, or said something similar, and do not bring a bone or a piece of dung. So I brought the stones in the corner of my garment and placed them by his side, and I then went away from him. When he finished, from answering the call of nature, he used them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 158. Narrated by Abdullah, the Prophet went out to answer the call of nature and asked me to bring 3 stones. I found 2 stones and searched for the third but could not find it. So took a dried piece of dung and brought it to him. He took the 2 stones and threw away the dung and said, this is a filthy thing. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 159. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet performed ablution by washing the body parts only once. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 160. Narrated by Abdullah bin Zayd, the Prophet performed ablution by washing the body parts twice. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 161. Narrated by Humran, the slave of Uthman, I saw Uthman bin Affan asking for a tumbler of water, and when it was brought, he poured water over his hands and washed them thrice, and then put his right hand in the water container and rinsed his mouth, washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out. Then he washed his face and forearms up to the elbows thrice, passed his wet hands over his head and washed his feet up to the ankles thrice. Then he said, Allah's apostle said, if anyone performs ablution like that of mine and offers a 2-rak'at prayer during which he does not think of anything else, not related to the present prayer, then his past sins will be forgiven. After performing the ablution, Uthman said, I am going to tell you a hadith which I would not have told you, had I not been compelled by a certain holy verse. The sub-narrator Urway said, this verse is, verily, those who conceal the clear signs and the guidance which we have sent down, 2:159. I heard the Prophet saying, if a man performs ablution perfectly and then offers the compulsory congregational prayer, Allah will forgive his sins committed between that prayer and the next prayer till he offers it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 162. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, whoever performs ablution should clean his nose with water by putting the water in it and then blowing it out, and whoever cleans his private parts with stones should do it with odd number of stones. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 163. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle said, "If any one of you performs ablution, he should put water in his nose and then blow it out, and whoever cleans his private parts with stones should do so with odd numbers. And whoever wakes up from his sleep should wash his hands before putting them in the water for ablution, because nobody knows where his hands were during sleep." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 164. Narrated by Abdullah bin Amr, the Prophet remained behind us on a journey. He joined us while we were performing ablution for the Asr prayer, which was overdue, and we were just passing wet hands over our feet, not washing them thoroughly, so he addressed us in a loud voice, saying twice or thrice, "Save your heels from the fire." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 165. Narrated by Humran, the freed slave of Uthman bin Affan, I saw Uthman bin Affan asking for a tumbler of water to perform ablution, and when it was brought, he poured water from it over his hands and washed them thrice, and then put his right hand in the water container and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out. Then he washed his face thrice, and then forearms up to the elbows thrice, then passed his wet hands over his head and then washed each foot thrice. After that Uthman said, "I saw the Prophet performing ablution like this of mine," and he said, "If anyone performs ablution like that of mine and offers a 2-rak'at prayer during which he does not think of anything else, not related to the present prayer, then his past sins will be forgiven." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 166. Narrated by Muhammad ibn Ziyad, I heard Abu Huraira saying as he passed by us while the people were performing ablution from a utensil containing water, "Perform ablution perfectly and thoroughly for Abul Qasim," the Prophet said, "Save your heels from the hell fire." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 167. Narrated by Ubayd ibn Jurayy, I asked Abdullah bin Umar, "O Abu Abdurrahman, I saw you doing 4 things which I never saw being done by any one of you companions." Abdullah bin Umar said, "What are those, O Ibn Jurayy?" I said, "I never saw you touching any corner of the Kaaba except these 2, facing south, Yemen, and I saw you wearing shoes made of tanned leather and dyeing your hair with henna, a kind of dye. I also noticed that whenever you were in Mecca, the people assume el-Haram on seeing the new moon crescent, first of Dhul Hijjah, while you did not assume the Ilal, Iram. Iram is also called Ilal, which means loud calling, because a Murim has to recite Talbiya aloud when assuming the state of Iram, till the 8th of Dhul Hijjah, day of Tarwiyah." Abdullah replied, "Regarding the corners of Kaaba, I never saw Allah's Apostle touching except those facing south, Yemen, and regarding the tanned leather shoes, no doubt I saw Allah's Apostle wearing non-hairy shoes, and he used to perform ablution while wearing the shoes, i.e. wash his feet and then put on the shoes. So I love to wear similar shoes. And about the dyeing of hair with henna, no doubt I saw Allah's Apostle dyeing his hair with it, and that is why I like to dye my hair with it. Regarding Ilal, I did not see Allah's Apostle assuming Ilal till he set out for Hajj, on the 8th of Dhul Hijjah. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 168. Narrated by Umayyah, that the Prophet at the time of washing his deceased daughter had said to them, "Start from the right side, beginning with those parts which are washed in ablution." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 169. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet used to like to start from the right side on wearing shoes, combing his hair and cleaning or washing himself, and on doing anything else. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 170. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, saw Allah's apostle when the Asr prayer was due and the people searched for water to perform ablution but they could not find it. Later on, a pot full of water for ablution was brought to Allah's apostle. He put his hand in that pot and ordered the people to perform ablution from it. I saw the water springing out from underneath his fingers till all of them performed the ablution. It was one of the miracles of the Prophet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 171. Narrated by Ibn Sirn, I said to Abluda, I have some of the hair of the Prophet which I got from Anas or from his family. Abida replied, no doubt if I had a single hair of that it would have been dearer to me than the whole world and whatever is in it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 172. Narrated by Anas, when Allah's apostle got his head shaved, Abu Talha was the first to take some of his hair. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 173. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, if a dog drinks from the utensil of any one of you it is essential to wash it 7 times. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 174. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, a man saw a dog eating mud from the severity of thirst. So, that man took a shoe, and filled it with water and kept on pouring the water for the dog till it quenched its thirst. So Allah approved of his deed and made him to enter paradise. And narrated Hamza bin Abdullah, my father said, during the lifetime of Allah's apostle, the dogs used to urinate, and pass through the mosques, come and go, nevertheless they never used to sprinkle water on it, urine of the dog. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 175. Narrated by Adi bin Hatim, I asked the Prophet about the hunting dogs, and he replied, if you let loose, with Allah's name, your tamed dog after a game and it hunts it, you may eat it, but if the dog eats of that game, then do not eat it because the dog has hunted it for itself. I further said, sometimes I send my dog for hunting and find another dog with it. He said, do not eat the game for you have mentioned Allah's name only on sending your dog and not the other dog. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 176. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, a person is considered in prayer as long as he is waiting for the prayer in the mosque as long as he does not do hadith. A non-Arab man asked, O Abi Huraira, what is hadith? I replied, it is the passing of wind, from the anus, that is one of the types of hadith. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 177. Narrated by Abbas bin Tamim, my uncle said, the Prophet said, one should not leave his prayer unless he hears sound or smells something. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 178. Narrated by Ali, I used to get emotional urethral discharges frequently and felt shy to ask Allah's apostle about it. So I requested Al-Miqdad bin al-Aswad to ask the Prophet about it. Al-Miqdad asked him and he replied, one has to perform ablution after it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 179. Narrated by Zayd bin Khalid, I asked Uthman bin Affan about a person who engaged in intercourse but did no discharge. Uthman replied, he should perform ablution like the one for our ordinary prayer but he must wash his penis. Uthman added, I heard it from Allah's apostle. I asked Ali Zubair, Talha, and Ubay bin Kabi about it and they, too, gave the same reply. This order was cancelled later on and taking a bath became necessary for such cases. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 180. Narrated by Abu Said al-Qud, Allah's apostle sent for an Ansari man who came with water dropping from his head. The Prophet said, "Perhaps we have forced you to hurry up, haven't we?" The Ansari replied, "Yes." Allah's apostle further said, "If you are forced to hurry up, during intercourse, or you do not discharge, then ablution is due on you." This order was cancelled later on, i.e. one has to take a bath. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 181. Narrated by Usama bin Zayd, when Allah's apostle departed from Arafat, he turned towards a mountain pass where he answered the call of nature. After he had finished, I poured water and he performed ablution, and then I said to him, "O Allah's apostle, will you offer the prayer?" He replied, "The musalla, place of the prayer, is ahead of you, in al-Muzdalifah." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 182. Narrated by al-Mughira bin Shubi'ah, I was in the company of Allah's apostle on one of the journeys, and he went out to answer the call of nature, and after he finished, I poured water and he performed ablution. He washed his face, forearms, and passed his wet hand over his head and over the two leather socks. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 183. Narrated by Abdullah bin Abbas, that he stayed overnight in the house of Ma'imunah, the wife of the Prophet, his aunt. He added, "I lay on the bed, cushioned transversely, while Allah's apostle and his wife lay in the lengthwise direction of the cushion. Allah's apostle slept till the middle of the night, either a bit before or a bit after it, and then woke up, rubbing the traces of sleep off his face with his hands. He then recited the last 10 verses of Surah Al-Imran, got up and went to a hanging water skin. He then performed the ablution from it, and it was a perfect ablution, and then stood up to offer the prayer. I, too, got up and did as the Prophet had done. Then I went and stood by his side. He placed his right hand on my head and caught my right ear and twisted it. He prayed 2 rakat, then 2 rakat, and 2 rakat, and then 2 rakat, and then 2 rakat, and then 2 rakat, separately 6 times, and finally 1 rak'ah, the witr. Then he lay down again in the bed till the mu'adhdhin came to him, whereupon the Prophet got up, offered a 2 light rakat prayer, and went out and led the Fajr prayer." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 184. Narrated by Asma bint Abu Bakr, I came to Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, during the solar eclipse. The people were standing and offering the prayer, and she was also praying. I asked her, "What is wrong with the people?" She beckoned with her hand towards the sky and said, "Subhanallah." I asked her, "Is there a sign?" She pointed out, "Yes." So I, too, stood for the prayer till I fell unconscious, and later on I poured water on my head. After the prayer, Allah's apostle praised and glorified Allah and said, "Just now I have seen something which I never saw before at this place of mine, including paradise and hell. I have been inspired, and have understood, that you will be put to trials in your graves, and these trials will be like the trials of Ad-Dajjal, or nearly like it." The sub-narrator is not sure of what Asma said. "Angels will come to every one of you and ask, 'What do you know about this man?' A believer will reply, 'He is Muhammad, Allah's apostle, and he came to us with self-evident truth and guidance. So we accepted his teaching, believed and followed him.' Then the angels will say to him to sleep in peace, as they have come to know that he was a believer. On the other hand, a hypocrite or a doubtful person will reply, 'I do not know, but heard the people saying something, and so I said the same.'" Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 185. Narrated by Yahya al-Mazini, a person asked Abdullah bin Zayd, who was the grandfather of Amr bin Yahya, Can you show me how Allah's apostle used to perform ablution? Abdullah bin Zayd replied in the affirmative and asked for water. He poured it on his hands and washed them twice, then he rinsed his mouth thrice and washed his nose with water thrice by putting water in it and blowing it out. He washed his face thrice and after that he washed his forearms up to the elbows twice and then passed his wet hands over his head from its front to its back and vice versa, beginning from the front and taking them to the back of his head up to the nape of the neck and then brought them to the front again from where he had started, and washed his feet, up to the ankles. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 186. Narrated by Amr, my father saw Amr bin Abi Hassan asking Abdullah bin Zayd about the ablution of the Prophet. Abdullah bin Zayd asked for earthenware pot containing water and in front of them performed ablution like that of the Prophet. He poured water from the pot over his hand and washed his hands thrice and then he put his hands in the pot and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out with 3 handfuls of water. Again he put his hand in the water and washed his face thrice and washed his forearms up to the elbows twice, and then put his hands in the water and then passed them over his head by bringing them to the front and then to the rear of the head once, and then he washed his feet up to the ankles. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 187. Narrated by Abu Juhayfa, Allah's apostle came to us at noon and water for ablution was brought to him. After he had performed ablution, the remaining water was taken by the people and they started smearing their bodies with it, as a blessed thing. The Prophet offered 2 rakat of the Zuhr prayer and then 2 rakat of the Asr prayer while an ansa, spear-headed stick, was there, as a sutra, in front of him. Abu Musa said, the Prophet asked for a tumbler containing water and washed both his hands and face in it and then threw a mouthful of water in the tumbler and said to both of us, Abu Musa and Bilal, drink from the tumbler and pour some of its water on your faces and chests. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 188. Narrated by Ibn Shihab, Mahmud bin Arabi, who was the person on whose face the Prophet had ejected a mouthful of water from his family's well while he was a boy, and Urway, on the authority of Al-Miswar and others, who testified each other, said, whenever the Prophet performed ablution, his companions were nearly fighting for the remains of the water. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 189. Narrated by As-Saib bin Yazid, my aunt took me to the Prophet and said, O Allah's apostle, this son of my sister has got a disease in his legs. So he passed his hands on my head and prayed for Allah's blessings for me, then he performed ablution and I drank from the remaining water. I stood behind him and saw the seal of prophethood between his shoulders, and it was like the Zur al-Hijla, means the button of a small tent, but some said egg of a partridge etc. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 190. Narrated by Amr bin Yahya, on the authority of his father, Abdullah bin Zayd poured water on his hands from a utensil containing water and washed them and then with 1 handful of water he rinsed his mouth and cleaned his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out. He repeated it thrice. He, then, washed his hands and forearms up to the elbows twice and passed wet hands over his head, both forwards and backwards, and washed his feet up to the ankles and said, this is the ablution of Allah's apostle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 191. Narrated by Amr bin Yahya, my father said, I saw Amr bin Abi Hassan asking Abdullah bin Zayd about the ablution of the Prophet. Abdullah bin Zayd asked for an earthenware pot containing water and performed ablution in front of them. He poured water over his hands and washed them thrice. Then he put his right hand in the pot and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out thrice with 3 handfuls of water. Again he put his hand in the water and washed his face thrice. After that he put his hand in the pot and washed his forearms up to the elbows twice and then again put his hand in the water and passed wet hands over his head by bringing them to the front and then to the back, and once more he put his hand in the pot and washed his feet, up to the ankles. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 192. Narrated by Wahib, that he, the Prophet in narration 191 above, had passed his wet hands on the head once only. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 193. Narrated by Jabir, Allah's Apostle came to visit me while I was sick and unconscious. He performed ablution and sprinkled the remaining water on me, and I became conscious and said, O Allah's Apostle, to whom will my inheritance go, as I have neither ascendants nor descendants? Then the divine verses regarding fara'id, inheritance, were revealed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 194. Narrated by Anas, it was the time for prayer, and those whose houses were near got up and went to their people, to perform ablution, and there remained some people, sitting. Then a painted stove pot, mikadab, containing water was brought to Allah's apostles. The pot was small, not broad enough for one to spread one's hand in, yet all the people performed ablution. The sub-narrator said, we asked Anas, how many persons were you? Anas replied, we were 80 or more. It was one of the miracles of Allah's apostle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 195. Narrated by Abu Musa, once the Prophet asked for a tumbler containing water. He washed his hands and face in it and also threw a mouthful of water in it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 196. Narrated by Abdullah bin Zayd, once Allah's Apostle came to us and we brought out water for him in a brass pot. He performed ablution thus, he washed his face thrice, and his forearms to the elbows twice, then passed his wet hands lightly over the head from front to rear and brought them to front again and washed his feet, up to the ankles. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 197. Narrated by Aisha, when the ailment of the Prophet became aggravated and his disease became severe, he asked his wives to permit him to be nursed, treated, in my house. So they gave him the permission. Then the Prophet came, to my house, with the support of 2 men, and his legs were dragging on the ground, between Abbas, and another man. Ubaydullah, the sub-narrator, said, I informed Abdullah bin Abbas of what Aisha said. Ibn Abbas said, do you know who was the other man? I replied in the negative. Ibn Abbas said, he was Ali, bin Abi Talib. Aisha further said, when the Prophet came to my house and his sickness became aggravated, he ordered us to pour 7 skins full of water on him, so that he might give some advice to the people. So he was seated in a mikadab, brass tub, belonging to Hafsa, the wife of the Prophet. Then, all of us started pouring water on him from the water skins till he beckoned to us to stop and that we have done what he wanted us to do. After that he went out to the people. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 198. Narrated by Amr bin Yahya, on the authority of his father, my uncle used to perform ablution extravagantly, and once he asked Abdullah bin Zayd to tell him how he had seen the Prophet performing ablution. He asked for an earthenware pot containing water, and poured water from it on his hands and washed them thrice, and then put his hand in the earthenware pot and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out thrice with 1 handful of water, he again put his hand in the water and took a handful of water and washed his face thrice, then washed his hands up to the elbows twice, and took water with his hand, and passed it over his head from front to back end. Then from back to front, and then washed his feet, up to the ankles, and said, I saw the Prophet performing ablution in that way. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 199. Narrated by Thabit, Anas said, the Prophet asked for water, and a tumbler with a broad base and no so deep, containing a small quantity of water, was brought to him, whereby he put his fingers in it. Anas further said, noticed the water springing out from amongst his fingers. Anas added, estimated that the people who performed ablution with it numbered between 70 to 80. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 200. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet used to take a bath with 1 sa or up to 5 muds, 1 sa equals muds, of water, and used to perform ablution with 1 mud of water. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 201. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Said bin Abi Iwaqtas said, the Prophet passed wet hands over his cuffs. Abdullah bin Umar asked Umar about it. Umar replied in the affirmative and added, whenever Said narrates a hadith from the Prophet, there is no need to ask anyone else about it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 202. Narrated by Al-Mughira bin Shubi'ah, once Allah's apostle went out to answer the call of nature, and I followed him with a tumbler containing water, and when he finished, I poured water and he performed ablution and passed wet hands over his cuffs. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 203. Narrated by Ja'far bin Amr bin Umayyah ad-Damri, my father said, I saw the Prophet passing wet hands over his cuffs. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 204. Narrated by Ja'far bin Amr, my father said, I saw the Prophet passing wet hands over his turban. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 204. Narrated by Ja'far bin Amr, my father said, I saw the Prophet passing wet hands over his turban and cuffs, leather socks. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 205. Narrated by Urwa bin al-Mughira, my father said, once I was in the company of the Prophet on a journey, and I dashed to take off his cuffs. He ordered me to leave them as he had put them after performing ablution. So he passed wet hands o'er them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 206. Narrated by Abdullah bin Abbas, Allah's apostle ate a piece of cooked mutton from the shoulder region and prayed without repeating ablution. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 207. Narrated by Ja'far bin Amr bin Umayyah, my father said, I saw Allah's apostle taking a piece of cooked mutton from the shoulder region, and then he was called for prayer. He put his knife down and prayed without repeating ablution. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 208. Narrated by Suwaid bin al-Nu'man, in the year of the conquest of Khaybar I went with Allah's apostle till we reached Sabah, a place near Khaybar, where Allah's apostle offered the Asr prayer and asked for food. Nothing but sork was brought. He ordered it to be moistened with water. He and all of us ate it, and the Prophet got up for the evening prayer, Maghrib prayer, rinsed his mouth with water, and we did the same, and he then prayed without repeating the ablution. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 209. Narrated by Ma'imunah, the Prophet ate a piece of mutton from the shoulder region and then prayed without repeating the ablution. Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 210. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, Allah's apostle drank milk, rinsed his mouth and said, "It has fat." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 211. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's apostle said, "If any one of you feels drowsy while praying, he should go to bed, sleep, till his slumber is over, because in praying while drowsy one does not know whether one is asking for forgiveness or for a bad thing for oneself." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 212. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, "If any one of you feels drowsy while praying, he should sleep till he understands what he is saying, reciting. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 213. Narrated by Amr bin Amir, Anas said, "The Prophet used to perform ablution for every prayer." I asked Anas, "What you used to do?" Anas replied, "We used to pray with the same ablution until we break it with hadith." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 214. Narrated by Suwaid bin Nu'man, in the year of the conquest of Khaybar I went with Allah's apostle till we reached As-Sabah, where Allah's apostle led the Asr prayer and asked for the food. Nothing but sa'ik was brought and we ate it and drank water. The Prophet got up for the Maghrib prayer, rinsed his mouth with water and then led the prayer without repeating the ablution. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 215. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, once the Prophet, while passing through one of the graveyards of Medina or Mecca, heard the voices of two persons who were being tortured in their graves. The Prophet said, "These two persons are being tortured not for a major sin, to avoid. The Prophet then added, "Yes. They are being tortured for a major sin. Indeed, one of them never saved himself from being soiled with his urine, while the other used to go about with calumnies, to make enmity between friends." The Prophet then asked for a green leaf of a date palm tree, broke it into two pieces and put one on each grave. On being asked why he had done so, he replied, "I hope that their torture might be lessened, till these get dried." Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 216. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, whenever the Prophet went to answer the call of nature, I used to bring water with which he used to clean his private parts. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 217. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet once passed by two graves and said, "These two persons are being tortured not for a major sin, to avoid. One of them never saved himself from being soiled with his urine, while the other used to go about with calumnies, to make enmity between friends. The Prophet then took a green leaf of a date palm tree, split it into pieces, and fixed one on each grave. They said, 'O Allah's apostle, why have you done so?' He replied, 'I hope that their punishment might be lessened till these, the pieces of the leaf, become dry.' See the footnote of Hadith 215. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 218. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet saw a Bedouin making water in the mosque and told the people not to disturb him. When he finished, the Prophet asked for some water and poured it over the urine. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 219. Narrated by Abu Huraira, a Bedouin stood up and started making water in the mosque. The people caught him, but the Prophet ordered them to leave him and to pour a bucket or a tumbler of water over the place where he had passed the urine. The Prophet then said, "You have been sent to make things easy and not to make them difficult." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 220. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet said as above, 219. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 221. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, a Bedouin came and passed urine in one corner of the mosque. The people shouted at him, but the Prophet stopped them till he finished urinating. The Prophet ordered them to spill a bucket of water over that place, and they did so. Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 222. Narrated by Aisha, the mother of faithful believers, a child was brought to Allah's apostle and it urinated on the garment of the Prophet. The Prophet asked for water and poured it over the soiled place. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 223. Narrated by Qais bint Misan, I brought my young son, who had not started eating ordinary food, to Allah's apostle, who took him and made him sit in his lap. The child urinated on the garment of the Prophet, so he asked for water and poured it over the soiled area, and did not wash it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 224. Narrated by Hudhaifa, once the Prophet went to the dumps of some people and passed urine while standing. He then asked for water, and so I brought it to him and he performed ablution. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 225. Narrated by Hudhaifa, the Prophet and I walked till we reached the dumps of some people. He stood, as any one of you stands, behind a wall and urinated. I went away, but he beckoned me to come. So I approached him and stood near his back till he finished. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 226. Narrated by Abu Wail, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari used to lay great stress on the question of urination, and he used to say, if anyone from Bani Israel happened to soil his clothes with urine, he used to cut that portion away. Hearing that, Hudhaifa said to Abu Wail, I wish he, Abu Musa, didn't lay great stress on that matter. Hudhaifa added, Allah's apostle went to the dumps of some people and urinated while standing. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 227. Narrated by Asma, a woman came to the Prophet and said, if any one of us gets menses in her clothes, then what should she do? He replied, she should take hold of the soiled place, rub it and put it in the water and rub it in order to remove the traces of blood, and then pour water over it. Then she can pray in it. Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 228. Narrated by Aisha, Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh came to the Prophet and said, O Allah's apostle, I get persistent bleeding from the uterus and do not become clean. Shall I give up my prayers? Allah's apostle replied, no, because it is from a blood vessel and not the menses. So when your real menses begins, give up your prayers, and when it has finished, wash off the blood, take a bath, and offer your prayers. Hisham, the sub-narrator, narrated that his father had also said, the Prophet told her, perform ablution for every prayer till the time of the next period comes. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 229. Narrated by Aisha, I used to wash the traces of janaba, semen, from the clothes of the Prophet, and he used to go for prayers while traces of water were still on it, water spots were still visible. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 230. Narrated by Aisha, as above, 229. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 231. Narrated by Sulaiman bin Yasar, I asked Aisha about the clothes soiled with semen. She replied, I used to wash it off the clothes of Allah's apostle and he would go for the prayer while water spots were still visible. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 232. Narrated by Amr bin Ma'iman, I heard Sulaiman bin Yasar talking about the clothes soiled with semen. He said that Aisha had said, I used to wash it off the clothes of Allah's apostle and he would go for the prayers while water spots were still visible on them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 233. Narrated by Aisha, I used to wash the semen off the clothes of the Prophet and even then I used to notice one or more spots on them. Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 234. Narrated by Abu Kilaba, Anas said, some people of Uql or Urana tribe came to Medina and its climate did not suit them. So the Prophet ordered them to go to the herd of milch camels and to drink their milk and urine, as a medicine. So they went as directed and after they became healthy, they killed the shepherd of the Prophet and drove away all the camels. The news reached the Prophet early in the morning and he sent men in their pursuit and they were captured and brought at noon. He then ordered to cut their hands and feet, and it was done, and their eyes were branded with heated pieces of iron. They were put in al-hara and when they asked for water, no water was given to them. Abu Kilaba said, those people committed theft and murder, became infidels after embracing Islam and fought against Allah and His Apostle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 235. Narrated by Anas, prior to the construction of the mosque, the Prophet offered the prayers at sheepfolds. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 236. Narrated by Ma'imuna, Allah's apostle was asked regarding ghee, cooking butter, in which a mouse had fallen. He said, take out the mouse and throw away the ghee around it and use the rest. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 237. Narrated by Ma'imuna, the Prophet was asked regarding ghee in which a mouse had fallen. He said, take out the mouse and throw away the ghee around it, and use the rest. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 238. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, a wound which a Muslim receives in Allah's cause will appear on the day of resurrection as it was at the time of infliction, blood will be flowing from the wound and its color will be that of the blood but will smell like musk. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 239. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle said, we, Muslims, are the last people to come in the world, but will be the foremost on the day of resurrection. The same narrator told that Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. The Prophet had said, you should not pass urine in stagnant water which is not flowing, then you may need to wash in it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 240. Narrated by Abdullah, while Allah's Apostle was prostrating, as stated below. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 241. Narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'udi, once the Prophet was offering prayers at the Kaaba. Abu Yal was sitting with some of his companions. One of them said to the others, who amongst you will bring the abdominal contents, intestines, etc., of a camel of Bani so and put it on the back of Muhammad, when he prostrates? The most unfortunate of them got up and brought it. He waited till the Prophet prostrate and then placed it on his back between his shoulders. I was watching but could not do anything. I wish I had some people with me to hold out against them. They started laughing and falling on one another. Allah's apostle was in prostration and he did not lift his head up till Fatima, Prophet's daughter, came and threw that camel's abdominal contents away from his back. He raised his head and said thrice, O Allah, punish Quraysh. So it was hard for Abu Yal and his companions when the Prophet invoked Allah against them, as they had a conviction that the prayers and invocations were accepted in the city, Mecca. The Prophet said, O Allah, punish Abu Yal, Utbah bin Rabi'ah, Shaiba bin Rabi'ah, Al-Walid bin Utbah, Umayyah bin Khalaf, and Uqbah bin al-Mu'id, and he mentioned the seventh whose name I cannot recall. By Allah in whose hands my life is, I saw the dead bodies of those persons who were counted by Allah's apostle in the Kalib, one of the wells, of Badr. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 242. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet once spat in his clothes. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 243. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet said, all drinks that produce intoxication are haram, forbidden to drink. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 244. Narrated by Abu Hazim, Sal bin Said as Said, was asked by the people, with what was the wound of the Prophet treated? Sal replied, none remains among the people living who knows that better than I used to bring water in his shield and Fatima used to wash the blood off his face. Then straw mat was burnt and the wound was filled with it. Hadith Collection www.hadithcollection.com. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 245. Narrated by Abu Burda, my father said, I came to the Prophet and saw him carrying a siwak in his hand and cleansing his teeth, saying, you, as if he was retching while the siwak was in his mouth. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 246. Narrated by Hudhaifa, whenever the Prophet got up at night, he used to clean his mouth with siwak. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 4, Hadith number 247. Narrated by Al-Bara bin Azib, the Prophet said to me, whenever you go to bed perform ablution like that for the prayer, lie on your right side and say, Allahumma aslam tu wajhi ilayka, wa fawwadtu amri ilayka, wa aljatu zayri ilayka rakbatan wa rabatan ilayka. La malja wa la manja minka illa ilayka. Allahumma amantu bika el lati anzalta wa binabayaka el lati arsalta, O Allah. I surrender to you and entrust all my affairs to you and depend upon you for your blessings both with hope and fear of you. There is no fleeing from you, and there is no place of protection and safety except with you, O Allah. I believe in your book, the Quran, which you have revealed, and in your Prophet, Muhammad, whom you have sent. Then if you die on that very night, you will die with faith, i.e. or the religion of Islam. Let the aforesaid words be your last utterance, before sleep. I repeated it before the Prophet, and when I reached Allahumma amantu bika el lati anzalta, O Allah, I believe in your book which you have revealed. I said, wa Rasulika, and your apostle. The Prophet said, no, but say wa nabiyaka el lati arsalta, your Prophet whom you have sent, instead. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 248. Narrated by Aisha, whenever the Prophet took a bath after janaba he started by washing his hands and then performed ablution like that for the prayer. After that he would put his fingers in water and move the roots of his hair with them, and then pour 3 handfuls of water over his head and then pour water all over his body. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 249. Narrated by Maimuna, the wife of the Prophet, Allah's apostle performed ablution like that for the prayer but did not wash his feet. He washed off the discharge from his private parts and then poured water over his body. He withdrew his feet from that place, the place where he took the bath, and then washed them. And that was his way of taking the bath of Janaba. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 250. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet and I used to take a bath from a single pot called farak. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 251. Narrated by Abu Salama, Aisha's brother and I went to Aisha and he asked her about the bath of the Prophet. She brought a pot containing about a sa of water and took a bath and poured it over her head, and at what time there was a screen between her and us. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 252. Narrated by Abu Ja'far, while I and my father were with Jabir bin Abdullah, some people asked him about taking a bath. He replied, "A sa of water is sufficient for you." A man said, "A sa is not sufficient for me." Jabir said, "A sa was sufficient for one who had more hair than you and was better than you," meaning the Prophet. And then Jabir put on his garment and led the prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 253. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet and Maimuna used to take a bath from a single pot. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 254. Narrated by Jubair bin Mut'im, Allah's apostle said, "As for me, I pour water 3 times on my head." And he pointed with both his hands. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 255. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet used to pour water 3 times on his head. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 256. Narrated by Abu Ja'far, Jabir bin Abdullah said to me, "Your cousin, Hassan bin Muhammad bin al-Hanafiyyah, came to me and asked about the bath of Janaba." I replied, "The Prophet uses to take 3 handfuls of water, pour them on his head and then pour more water over his body." Al-Hassan said to me, "I am a hairy man." I replied, "The Prophet had more hair than you." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 257. Narrated by Maimuna, I placed water for the bath of the Prophet. He washed his hands twice or thrice and then poured water on his left hand and washed his private parts. He rubbed his hands over the earth, and cleaned them, rinsed his mouth, washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing it out, washed his face and both forearms and then poured water over his body. Then he withdrew from that place and washed his feet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 258. Narrated by Aisha, whenever the Prophet took the bath of Janaba, sexual relation or wet dream, he asked for the hilab or some other scent. He used to take it in his hand, rub it first over the right side of his head and then over the left and then rub the middle of his head with both hands. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 259. Narrated by Maimuna, I placed water for the bath of the Prophet and he poured water with his right hand on his left and washed them. Then he washed his private parts and rubbed his hands on the ground, washed them with water, rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing it out, washed his face and poured water on his head. He withdrew from that place and washed his feet. A piece of cloth, towel, was given to him but he did not use it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 260. Narrated by Maimuna, the Prophet took the bath of Janaba. Sexual relation or wet dream. He first cleaned his private parts with his hand, and then rubbed it, that hand, on the wall, earth, and washed it. Then he performed ablution like that for the prayer, and after the bath he washed his feet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 261. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet and I used to take a bath from a single pot of water and our hands used to go in the pot after each other in turn. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 262. Narrated by Aisha, whenever Allah's Apostle took a bath of janaba, he washed his hands first. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 263. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet and I used to take a bath from a single pot of water after janaba. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 264. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet and one of his wives used to take a bath from a single pot of water. Shubi'a added to Anas's statement after the janaba. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 265. Narrated by Maimuna, I placed water for the bath of Allah's Apostle and he poured water over his hands and washed them twice or thrice, then he poured water with his right hand over his left and washed his private parts, with his left hand. He rubbed his hand over the earth and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing it out. After that he washed his face, both forearms and head thrice and then poured water over his body. He withdrew from that place and washed his feet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 266. Narrated by Maimuna bint al-Harith, I placed water for the bath of Allah's Apostle and put a screen. He poured water over his hands, and washed them once or twice. The subnarrator added that he did not remember if she had said thrice or not. Then he poured water with his right hand over his left one and washed his private parts. He rubbed his hand over the earth or the wall and washed it. He rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing it out. He washed his face, forearms, and head. He poured water over his body and then withdrew from that place and washed his feet. I presented him a piece of cloth, towel, and he pointed with his hand, that he does not want it, and did not take it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 267. Narrated by Muhammad bin al-Muntathir, on the authority of his father that he had asked Aisha, about the Hadith of Ibn Umar. She said, May Allah be merciful to Abu Abdurrahman. I used to put scent on Allah's Apostle and he used to go round his wives, and in the morning he assumed the ihram, and the fragrance of scent was still coming out from his body. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 268. Narrated by Qatada, Anas bin Malik said, the Prophet used to visit all his wives in a round, during the day and night and they were 11 in number. I asked Anas, had the Prophet the strength for it? Anas replied, we used to say that the Prophet was given the strength of 30 men. And Said said on the authority of Qatada that Anas had told him about 9 wives only, not 11. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 269. Narrated by Ali, I used to get emotional urethral discharge frequently. Being the son-in-law of the Prophet, I requested a man to ask him about it. So the man asked the Prophet about it. The Prophet replied, perform ablution after washing your organ, penis. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 270. Narrated by Muhammad bin al-Muntathir, on the authority of his father that he had asked Aisha about the saying of Ibn Umar, i.e. he did not like to be a murim while the smell of scent was still coming from his body. Aisha said, I scented Allah's apostle and he went round, had sexual intercourse with all his wives, and in the morning he was muhrim, after taking a bath. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 271. Narrated by Aisha, it is as if I am just looking at the glitter of scent in the parting of the Prophet's head hair while he was a muhrim. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 272. Narrated by Hisham bin Urwa, on the authority of his father, Aisha said, whenever Allah's apostle took the bath of Janaba, he cleaned his hands and performed ablution like that for prayer and then took a bath and rubbed his hair, till he felt that the whole skin of the head had become wet, then he would pour water thrice and wash the rest of the body. Aisha further said, I and Allah's apostle used to take a bath from a single water container, from which we took water simultaneously. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 273. Narrated by Maimuna, water was placed for the ablution of Allah's apostle after Janaba. He poured water with his right hand over his left twice or thrice and then washed his private parts and rubbed his hand on the earth or on a wall twice or thrice and then rinsed his mouth, washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out arid, then washed his face and forearms and poured water over his head and washed his body. Then he shifted from that place and washed his feet. I brought a piece of cloth, but he did not take it and removed the traces of water from his body with his hand. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 274. Narrated by Abu Huraira, once the call, Iqama, for the prayer was announced and the rows were straightened. Allah's apostle came out, and when he stood up at his musalla, he remembered that he was junub. Then he ordered us to stay at our places and went to take a bath and then returned with water dropping from his head. He said, Allahu Akbar, and we all offered the prayer with him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 275. Narrated by Maimuna, I placed water for the bath of the Prophet and screened him with a garment. He poured water over his hands and washed them. After that he poured water with his right hand over his left and washed his private parts, rubbed his hands with earth and washed them, rinsed his mouth, washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out and then washed his face and forearms. He poured water over his head and body. He then shifted from that place and washed his feet. I gave him a piece of cloth but he did not take it and came out removing the water from his body with both his hands. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 276. Narrated by Aisha, whenever any one of us was junub, she poured water over her head thrice with both her hands and then rubbed the right side of her head with one hand and rubbed the left side of the head with the other hand. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 277. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, the people of Bani Israel used to take bath naked, all together, looking at each other. The Prophet Moses used to take a bath alone. They said, by Allah, nothing prevents Moses from taking a bath with us except that he has a scrotal hernia. So once Moses went out to take a bath and put his clothes over a stone and then that stone ran away with his clothes. Moses followed that stone saying, my clothes, O stone! My clothes, O stone! Till the people of Bani Israel saw him and said, by Allah, Moses has got no defect in his body. Moses took his clothes and began to beat the stone. Abu Huraira added, by Allah, there are still 6 or 7 marks present on the stone from that excessive beating. Narrated Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, when the Prophet Job, Ayub, was taking a bath naked, golden locusts began to fall on him. Job started collecting them in his clothes. His Lord addressed him, O Job, haven't I given you enough so that you are not in need of them? Job replied, Yes. By your honor, power. But I cannot dispense with your blessings. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 278. Narrated by Hani bint Abi Talib, I went to Allah's Apostle in the year of the conquest of Mecca and found him taking a bath while Fatima was screening him. The Prophet asked, Who is it? I replied, I am Hani. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 279. Narrated by Maimuna, I screened the Prophet while he was taking a bath of janaba. He washed his hands, poured water from his right hand over his left and washed his private parts. Then he rubbed his hand over a wall or the earth, and performed ablution similar to that for the prayer but did not wash his feet. Then he poured water over his body, shifted from that place, and washed his feet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 280. Narrated by Salama, the mother of the believers, Sulaim, the wife of Abu Talha, came to Allah's Apostle and said, O Allah's Apostle, verily Allah is not shy of telling you the truth. Is it necessary for a woman to take a bath after she has a wet dream, nocturnal sexual discharge? Allah's Apostle replied, Yes, if she notices a discharge. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 281. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet came across me in one of the streets of Medina and at that time I was junub. So I slipped away from him and went to take a bath. On my return the Prophet said, O Abu Huraira, where have you been? I replied, I was junub, so I disliked to sit in your company. The Prophet said, Subhanallah. A believer never becomes impure. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 282. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet used to visit all his wives in one night and he had 9 wives at that time. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 283. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle came across me and I was junub. He took my hand and I went along with him till he sat down. I slipped away, went home and took a bath. When I came back, he was still sitting there. He then said to me, O Abu Huraira, where have you been? I told him about it. The Prophet said, Subhanallah. O Abu Huraira, a believer never becomes impure. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 284. Narrated by Abu Salama, I asked Aisha, did the Prophet used to sleep while he was junub? She replied, yes, but he used to perform ablution before going to bed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 285. Narrated by Umar bin al-Khattab, I asked Allah's Apostle, can any one of us sleep while he is junub? He replied, yes, if he performs ablution, he can sleep while he is junub. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 286. Narrated by Aisha, whenever the Prophet intended to sleep while he was junub, he used to wash his private parts and perform ablution like that for the prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 287. Narrated by Abdullah, Umar asked the Prophet, can any one of us sleep while he is junub? He replied, yes, if he performs ablution. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 288. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Umar bin al-Khattab told Allah's Apostle, I became junub at night. Allah's Apostle replied, perform ablution after washing your private parts and then sleep. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 289. Narrated by Hisham, as the following Hadith 290. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 290. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, when a man sits in between the four parts of a woman and did the sexual intercourse with her, bath becomes compulsory. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 291. Narrated by Zayd bin Khalid al-Juhani, I asked Uthman bin Affan about a man who engaged in the sexual intercourse with his wife but did not discharge. Uthman replied, he should perform ablution like that for the prayer after washing his private parts. Uthman added, I heard that from Allah's Apostle. I asked Ali bin Abi Talib, Zubair bin Al-Awwam, Talha bin Ubaydullah and Ubay bin Ka'b and gave the same reply. Abu Ayyub said that he had heard that from Allah's Apostle, this order was cancelled later on, so one has to take a bath. See Hadith number 180. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 5, Hadith number 292. Narrated by Ubay bin Ka'b, I asked Allah's Apostle about a man who engages in sexual intercourse with his wife but does not discharge. He replied, he should wash the parts which comes in contact with the private parts of the woman, perform ablution, and then pray. Abu Abdullah said, taking a bath is safer and is the last order. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 293. Narrated by Al-Qasim, Aisha said, we set out with the sole intention of performing Hajj, and when we reached Sarif, a place 6 miles from Mecca, I got my menses. Allah's Apostle came to me while I was weeping. He said, what is the matter with you? Have you got your menses? I replied, yes. He said, this is a thing which Allah has ordained for the daughters of Adam. So do what all the pilgrims do with the exception of the ta'af, circumambulation, round the Kaaba. Aisha added, Allah's Apostle sacrificed cows on behalf of his wives. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 294. Narrated by Aisha, while in menses, I used to comb the hair of Allah's Apostle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 295. Narrated by Urway, a person asked me, can a woman in menses serve me? And can a junub woman come close to me? I replied, all this is easy for me. All of them can serve me, and there is no harm for any other person to do the same. Aisha told me that she used to comb the hair of Allah's Apostle while she was in her menses, and he was in itikaf, in the mosque. He would bring his head near her in her room and she would comb his hair, while she used to be in her menses. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 296. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet used to lean on my lap and recite Quran while I was in menses. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 297. Narrated by Salama, while I was laying with the Prophet under a single woolen sheet, I got the menses. I slipped away and put on the clothes for menses. He said, have you got nifas, menses? I replied, yes. He then called me and made me lie with him under the same sheet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 298. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet and I used to take a bath from a single pot while we were junub. During the menses, he used to order me to put on an izar, dress worn below the waist, and used to fondle me. While in itikaf, he used to bring his head near me and I would wash it while I used to be in my periods, menses. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 299. Narrated by Abdurrahman bin al-Aswad, on the authority of his father, Aisha said, whenever Allah's apostle wanted to fondle any one of us during her periods, menses, he used to order her to put on an izar and start fondling her. Aisha added, none of you could control his sexual desires as the Prophet could. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 300. Narrated by Maimuna, whenever Allah's apostle wanted to fondle any of his wives during the periods, menses, he used to ask her to wear an izar. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 301. Narrated by Abu Said al-Khudri, once Allah's apostle went out to the musalla, to offer the prayer, Oid al-Adha or al-Fitr prayer. Then he passed by the women and said, O women! Give alms, as I have seen that the majority of the dwellers of hellfire were you, women. They asked, why is it so, O Allah's apostle? He replied, you curse frequently and are ungrateful to your husbands. I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. A cautious sensible man could be led astray by some of you. The women asked, O Allah's apostle, what is deficient in our intelligence and religion? He said, is not the evidence of two women equal to the witness of one man? They replied in the affirmative. He said, this is the deficiency in her intelligence. Isn't it true that a woman can neither pray nor fast during her menses? The women replied in the affirmative. He said, this is the deficiency in her religion. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 302. Narrated by Aisha, we set out with the Prophet for Hajj, and when we reached Sarif I got my menses. When the Prophet came to me, I was weeping. He asked, why are you weeping? I said, I wish if I had not performed Hajj this year. He asked, maybe that you got your menses. I replied, yes. He then said, this is the thing which Allah has ordained for all the daughters of Adam. So do what all the pilgrims do, except that you do not perform the tawaf round the Kaaba till you are clean. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 303. Narrated by Aisha, Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh said to Allah's apostle, O Allah's apostle! I do not become clean from bleeding. Shall I give up my prayers? Allah's apostle replied, no, because it is from a blood vessel and not the menses. So when the real menses begins, give up your prayers, and when it, the period, has finished, wash the blood off your body, take a bath, and offer your prayers. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 304. Narrated by Asma bint Abi Bakr, a woman asked Allah's apostle, O Allah's apostle! What should we do, if the blood of menses falls on our clothes? Allah's apostle replied, if the blood of menses falls on the garment of any one of you, she must take hold of the blood spot, rub it, and wash it with water, and then pray in, with it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 305. Narrated by Aisha, whenever any one of us got her menses, she, on becoming clean, used to take hold of the blood spot and rub the blood off her garment, and pour water over it and wash that portion thoroughly and sprinkle water over the rest of the garment. After that she would pray in, with it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 306. Narrated by Aisha, once one of the wives of the Prophet did itikaf along with him, and she was getting bleeding in between her periods. She used to see the blood, from her private parts, and she would perhaps put a dish under her for the blood. The sub-narrator Ikrimah added, Aisha once saw the liquid of safflower and said, it looks like what so and so used to have. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 307. Narrated by Aisha, one of the wives of Allah's Apostle joined him in al-Tikaf and she noticed blood and yellowish discharge from her private parts, and put a dish under her when she prayed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 308. Narrated by Aisha, one of the mothers of the faithful believers, i.e. the wives of the Prophet, did al-Tikaf while she was having bleeding in between her periods. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 309. Narrated by Aisha, none of us had more than a single garment and we used to have our menses while wearing it. Whenever it got soiled with blood of menses we used to apply saliva to the blood spot and rub off the blood with our nails. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 310. Narrated by Umayyah, we were forbidden to mourn for a dead person for more than 3 days except in the case of a husband for whom mourning was allowed for 4 months and 10 days. During that time, we were not allowed to put kohl, antimony eye powder, in our eyes or to use perfumes or to put on colored clothes except a dress made of asb, a kind of Yemen cloth, very coarse and rough. We were allowed very light perfumes at the time of taking a bath after menses and also we were forbidden to go with the funeral procession. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 311. Narrated by Aisha, a woman asked the Prophet about the bath which is take after finishing from the menses. The Prophet told her what to do and said, "Purify yourself with a piece of cloth scented with musk." The woman asked, "How shall I purify myself with it?" He said, "Subhanallah. Purify yourself with it. I pulled her to myself and said, "Rub the place soiled with blood with it." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 312. Narrated by Aisha, an Ansari woman asked the Prophet how to take a bath after finishing from the menses. He replied, "Take a piece of cloth perfumed with musk and clean the private parts with it thrice." The Prophet felt shy and turned his face. So pulled her to me and told her what the Prophet meant. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 313. Narrated by Aisha, in the last Hajj of Allah's Apostle I assumed the ihram for Hajj along with Allah Apostle. I was one of those who intended to perform Hajj and Umrah, and did not take the hadi, animal for sacrifice, with me. I got my menses and was not clean till the night of Arafat. I said, "O Allah's Apostle, it is the night of the day of Arafat and I intended to perform the Hajj tamattu with Umrah." Allah's Apostle told me to undo my hair and comb it and to postpone the Umrah. I did the same and completed the Hajj. On the night of Al-Hasba, i.e. place outside Mecca where the pilgrims go after finishing all the ceremonies Hajj at Mina, he, the Prophet, ordered Abdurrahman, Aisha's brother, to take me to At-Tan'im to assume the ihram for Umrah in lieu of that of Hajj tamattu which I had intended to perform. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 314. Narrated by Aisha, on the 1st of Dhul Hijjah we set out with the intention of performing Hajj. Allah's Apostle said, "Anyone who likes to assume the ihram for Umrah he can do so." Had I not brought the hadi with me, I would have assumed the ihram for Umrah. Some of us assumed the ihram for Umrah while the others assumed the ihram for Hajj. I was one of those who assumed the ihram for Umrah. I got menses and kept on menstruating until the day of Arafat and complained of that to the Prophet. He told me to postpone my Umrah, undo and comb my hair, and to assure the ihram of Hajj and I did so. On the rite of Hasba, he sent my brother Abdurrahman bin Abi Bakr with me to At-Ta'im, where I assumed the ihram for Umrah in lieu of the previous one. Hisham said, "For that, Umrah, no hadi, fasting or were required." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 315. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet said, "At every womb Allah appoints an angel who says, O Lord. A drop of semen, O Lord. A clot, O Lord. A little lump of flesh." Then if Allah wishes to complete its creation, the angel asks, O Lord. Will it be a male or female, a wretched or a blessed, and how much will his provision be? And what will his age be? So all that is written while the child is still in the mother's womb. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 316. Narrated by Urwa, Aisha said, "We set out with the Prophet in his last Hajj. Some of us intended to perform Umrah while others Hajj. When we reached Mecca, Allah's Apostle said, those who had assumed the Ihram for Umrah and had not brought the Hadi should finish his Ihram, and whoever had assumed the Ihram for Umrah and brought the Hadi should not finish the Ihram till he has slaughtered his Hadi, and whoever had assumed the Ihram for Hajj should complete his Hajj." Aisha further said, "I got my periods, menses, and kept on menstruating till the day of Arafat, and I had assumed the Ihram for Umrah only, tamattu. The Prophet ordered me to undo and comb my head hair and assume the Ihram for Hajj only and leave the Umrah. I did the same till I completed the Hajj. Then the Prophet sent Abdurrahman bin Abi Bakr with me and ordered me to perform Umrah from at-Tan'im in lieu of the missed Umrah." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 317. Narrated by Aisha, Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh used to have bleeding in between the periods, so she asked the Prophet about it. He replied, "The bleeding is from a blood vessel and not the menses. So give up the prayers when the real menses begin, and when it has finished, take a bath and start praying." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 318. Narrated by Mu'adha, a woman asked Aisha, "Should I offer the prayers that which I did not offer because of menses?" Aisha said, "Are you from the Hurora, a town in Iraq? We were with the Prophet and used to get our periods, but he never ordered us to offer them, the prayers missed during menses." Aisha perhaps said, "We did not offer them." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 319. Narrated by Zainab bint Abi Salama, Salama said, "I got my menses while I was lying with the Prophet under a woolen sheet. So I slipped away, took the clothes for menses and put them on. Allah's Apostle said, 'Have you got your menses?' I replied, 'Yes.' Then he called me and took me with him under the woolen sheet." Salama further said, "The Prophet used to kiss me while he was fasting. The Prophet and I used to take the bath of janaba from a single pot." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 320. Narrated by Salama, "While I was lying with the Prophet under a woolen sheet, I got my menses. I slipped away and put on the clothes for menses. The Prophet said, 'Have you got your menses?' I replied, 'Yes.' He called me and I slept with him under the woolen sheet." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 321. Narrated by Ayyub, Hafsa said, "We used to forbid our young women to go out for the 2 Eid prayers. A woman came and stayed at the palace of Bani Khalaf, and she narrated about her sister whose husband took part in 12 holy battles along with the Prophet, and her sister was with her husband in 6 out of these 12. She, the woman's sister, said, 'We used to treat the wounded, look after the patients, and once I asked the Prophet, is there any harm for any of us to stay at home if she doesn't have a veil? He said, she should cover herself with the veil of her companion and should participate in the good deeds and in the religious gathering of the Muslims.' When Ahmadiyya came, I asked her whether she had heard it from the Prophet. She replied, yes. May my father be sacrificed for him, the Prophet. Whenever she mentioned the Prophet, she used to say, may my father be sacrificed for him. I have heard the Prophet saying, the unmarried young virgins and the mature girl who stay often screened, or the young unmarried virgins who often stay screened, and the menstruating women should come out and participate in the good deeds as well as the religious gathering of the faithful believers, but the menstruating women should keep away from the musalla, praying place. Hafsa asked Ahmadiyya surprisingly, do you say the menstruating women? She replied, doesn't a menstruating woman attend Arafat, Hajj, and such other deeds? Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 322. Narrated by Aisha, Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh asked the Prophet, I got persistent bleeding, in between the periods, and do not become clean. Shall I give up prayers? He replied, no, this is from a blood vessel. Give up the prayers only for the days on which you usually get the menses, and then take a bath and offer your prayers. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 323. Narrated by Ahmadiyya, we never considered yellowish discharge as a thing of importance, as menses. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 324. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, Habiba got bleeding in between the periods for 7 years. She asked Allah's apostle about it. He ordered her to take a bath, after the termination of actual periods, and added that it was, from, a blood vessel. So she used to take a bath for every prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 325. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, I told Allah's apostle that Safiya bint Huyay had got her menses. He said, she will probably delay us. Did she perform tawaf, al-ifada, with you? We replied, yes. On that the Prophet told her to depart. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 326. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, a woman is allowed to leave, go back home, if she gets menses, after tawaf al-ifada. Ibn Umar formerly used to say that she should not leave, but later on I heard him saying, she may leave, since Allah's apostle gave them the permission to leave, after tawaf al-ifada. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 327. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet said to me, give up the prayer when your menses begin, and when it has finished, wash the blood off your body, take a bath, and start praying. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 328. Narrated by Samura bin Jundab, the Prophet offered the funeral prayer for the dead body of a woman who died of, during, delivery, i.e. childbirth, and he stood by the middle of her body. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 6, Hadith number 329. Narrated by Ma'imunah, the wife of the Prophet, during my menses, I never prayed, but used to sit on the mat beside the mosque of Allah's apostle. He used to offer the prayer on his sheet, and in prostration some of his clothes used to touch me.